The first time I kissed her, I believed it was forever. But the night I found out my own daughter helped her hide the affair, that was the night I stopped believing in anything. This isn't just a story about a broken marriage. It's the story of a man who lost everything and had to burn it all down just to survive. The first time I met her, I never imagined how much she would come to mean to me. Joselyn had a way of drawing people in, of making them feel like they were the most important person in the room. Our honeymoon was no exception. It was like the world had stepped aside to let us experience something extraordinary. I remember those days in Florida like they were yesterday, like everything had clicked into place, as if the universe itself had aligned in our favor. The first night we arrived in Clearwater Beach, we didn't need words. The gentle rush of the waves, the golden glow of the setting sun, it all seemed to paint the perfect picture of love. Joselyn, with her laugh that echoed like music, and the way she touched my hand as we strolled along the shoreline, made everything else fade into the background. The air, tinged with the scent of jasmine, wrapped around us like a soft blanket, a symbol of the calm that had settled over our relationship. It was the kind of peace that you don't just feel, you savor it, hold onto it like something precious. But it wasn't just the scenery that made those days so memorable. It was the way we interacted with each other, the little moments that seemed to matter more than the grand gestures. We hiked through forests, hand in hand, and stumbled upon hidden waterfalls. There was something about the raw beauty of nature, the power of it all, that made us feel so in sync, so alive. The sense that we were part of something greater than ourselves, something timeless, filled our hearts. Every evening, we returned to our beachside cottage in Key West, a cozy retreat that overlooked the ocean. The sunsets there were breathtaking, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. We would sit on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sky change, a quiet reminder of the bond we shared. Those moments felt endless. I could have stayed there forever, and I would have, if it meant that I could continue living in that bubble of serenity with Joselyn. The nights were equally magical, often beginning with dinner under the stars on the beach. The fresh seafood and local delicacies we devoured felt like they were meant to be shared with someone special. But, more than anything, it was Joselyn's smile, so simple, so genuine, that made everything unforgettable. There was nothing more beautiful to me than seeing her so at peace, so happy. It wasn't just a vacation, it was a declaration of our love, a promise that we were in this together for the long haul. And for the first time, I allowed myself to truly believe that nothing could tear us apart. It was a time of pure joy, filled with the kinds of memories that I thought would never fade. But, as with all things, time has a way of revealing cracks in even the strongest of foundations. That honeymoon, those precious days in Florida, would later become a painful reminder of what we once had, of how quickly things can change. The love that felt so solid, so certain, would soon be tested in ways we never imagined. As I sit here now, reflecting on those days, I can't help but wonder where it all went wrong. It feels as though, in the blink of an eye, everything shifted. The love that once seemed unbreakable would soon be overshadowed by betrayal, by actions I never saw coming. The carefree, romantic days we spent together on Clearwater Beach now feel like a distant memory, one that I hold on to, even as the weight of the future presses on. And now, as I sit at my desk, I can't help but wonder how long those beautiful moments will remain in my heart before they, too, begin to fade. The past is a delicate thing, and while some memories stay with us forever, others, they slip away, replaced by the harsh reality of what we face now. It's hard not to feel a sense of loss as I think about those days. But even harder is the realization that something so beautiful has become the backdrop for a much darker chapter in our lives. The honeymoon was just the beginning, and I couldn't have known then what lay ahead, what would come to define not just our marriage, but who we would become as individuals, as a family. Little did I know, the love we once shared would soon be tested in a way I never expected, leading us down a path none of us were prepared for. The days of innocence, of simple joys and endless laughter, would soon come to an end. And as the storm clouds gathered on the horizon, I had no idea just how much everything would change. The moment I walked into the living room, the weight of my thoughts clung to me like an unbearable fog. I hadn't been prepared for what was about to unfold, yet as the pieces fell into place, it was undeniable, the truth hit harder than I had ever imagined. Joselyn, the woman I had loved with everything I had betrayed me. But what made it worse was not just the affair itself, it was the revelation that our daughter, Sharon, had played an active part in this betrayal. The anger I felt toward Joselyn morphed into something far more complex, a deep, raw disbelief, mixed with confusion that churned like an endless storm within me. I had spent years building what I believed to be a solid foundation with Joselyn. Our love, our bond, had always seemed unwavering. How could I have been so blind? Joselyn had become my confidant, my best friend, and the very thought of losing that trust was more than I could comprehend. And now, seeing Sharon, my own flesh and blood, sitting in front of me, I felt a sinking betrayal that I never could have expected. How could she? How could she do this to me? How could she have facilitated something that would forever shatter the life I had worked so hard to build? The truth unfolded before me slowly, painfully. I had noticed the changes, the little things, the way Joselyn's eyes would sometimes dart away when I asked simple questions, the long hours she had started spending at the studio. But I had brushed it all off, attributing it to stress or the weariness of daily life. The more I pushed those thoughts aside, the more they festered in the back of my mind, until one day, when I had returned home early from work, everything became painfully clear. Joselyn had been seeing another man. The shocking part was that it wasn't just some random fling. No, it was far worse. Sharon knew. Not only did she know, but she had helped orchestrate it. The betrayal was a twofold wound, one inflicted by Joselyn and the other by my own daughter. Sharon, my little girl, the one I had raised and loved unconditionally, had helped keep me in the dark. She had allowed this lie to grow, knowing it would tear me apart when the truth eventually surfaced. I felt sick to my stomach. I could barely breathe as the weight of it all pressed down on my chest. The anger I had for Joselyn morphed into a deep ache that made every part of me feel hollow. How could she do this? How could she betray everything we had? Worse, how could Sharon be a part of it? I wanted to scream, to lash out, to make sense of the mess my life had become. But nothing made sense. The hurt I felt was suffocating, overwhelming. I had built a life around trust, around a belief that what we had was something real, something worth protecting. Now, that foundation had crumbled, and I was left standing in the ruins, unable to make sense of what had happened. My mind raced with thoughts I couldn't even control. I felt as if my heart had been ripped out, and all I was left with were the shattered pieces of a life that no longer made sense. I stood there, in the center of it all, feeling lost. The questions I asked myself seemed to echo in the silence. How did it come to this? What went wrong? I could still hear the sound of Joselyn's voice in my head, her soft laughter from the early days of our marriage. How could that woman, the one I had once known so intimately, be capable of such a betrayal? And how could Sharon, my own daughter, betray me like this? I walked over to the window, my eyes scanning the street outside. The world had moved on, oblivious to the storm that was brewing inside my own home. Everything felt distorted, out of place, as if the very ground beneath me had shifted. I could hear Joselyn's voice calling to me from across the house, but it seemed distant, as if I were hearing it from a far-off place, far removed from the life we had once shared. Then, I saw it, the look in Sharon's eyes as she sat there, her hands wringing together nervously. The guilt on her face was unmistakable, and I knew in that instant that she had known everything. She had known about the affair, known how it would tear me apart, and yet she had stood by, watching it happen. And now, here she was, pleading for my forgiveness, trying to convince me that she had done what she had done out of love for both of us. The betrayal, the lies, it all seemed too much to bear. I was torn. Part of me wanted to reach out, to understand why she did what she did, but another part of me, the part that was still reeling from the shock, wanted nothing more than to shut her out. She had crossed a line, one I wasn't sure could ever be uncrossed. My anger flared, and yet, beneath it all, I felt something else, a deep, aching sorrow that seemed to consume me from the inside out. It was a sorrow for the life I thought I had, for the family I thought I knew. It was too much to process, too much to understand all at once. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone, but even as I dialed Joselyn's number, I wasn't sure what I would say. The words seemed meaningless now, hollow. What could I say to her? What could I say to anyone? As the phone rang, I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. She picked up, but the words we exchanged were fragmented, broken. All I could think about was the damage that had been done. How could she justify this? How could anyone? The silence between us felt like an eternity, and in that moment, I realized that the love we once shared was slipping through my fingers, never to return. And then it hit me, the betrayal wasn't just the affair itself. It wasn't just a broken trust or the lies. It was the realization that everything I had believed in, everything I had built my life around, had been nothing but a facade. The world I thought I knew, the life I thought I was living, had been built on lies. I could no longer see the life I had with Joselyn as something pure. It was tainted, distorted by her actions, and by Sharon's participation in the deception. In the weeks that followed, everything about our life seemed to shift, as if the very foundation of our home had been cracked and was slowly crumbling. Joselyn's presence became something I could no longer tolerate. Every glance, every word felt laced with doubt. The person I once saw as my partner, my rock, became a stranger whose actions I could no longer understand. And Sharon, how could I even look at her the same way again? The trust one had in her was gone, as if it had never existed. The thought of them both together, conspiring against me, was unbearable. But what hurt the most was how I felt, empty. Alone. The love I thought was strong, the foundation I thought was unshakable, was now nothing more than a hollow memory. I had been living in a lie for so long, and as the truth slowly revealed itself, I was forced to confront the terrifying reality of what had been happening under my nose. There was no coming back from this. What was left to save? My life, once filled with the joy of family and the comfort of love, had become a prison of emotional turmoil. The shock of betrayal still gripped me, but now, as I stared out into the world that had once seemed so familiar, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized, haunted by the questions that would never have answers. Was it too late for forgiveness? Would I ever trust again? Would I be able to forgive Sharon? Would Joselyn ever truly understand the magnitude of her betrayal? I didn't know. All I knew was that my heart was heavy, and the weight of everything that had happened would never let me forget the truth. The truth that had shattered everything I thought I knew. The fallout from the discovery of Joselyn's affair had begun, and it was like a tsunami crashing through my life, leaving destruction in its wake. I had barely registered the impact of the truth when it hit me with full force. Emotionally, I had never been so shaken. My thoughts became a whirlwind of anger, disbelief, and confusion, all of which mingled together to create an emotional collapse that I could not have predicted. I felt as though the world around me was closing in, pushing me deeper into the darkness. The weight of the betrayal was unbearable. For years, I had believed that Joselyn and I shared something unbreakable, a bond that had weathered decades of life's trials. The idea that she could have been capable of such deception was beyond my comprehension. It wasn't just the affair that devastated me, it was the realization that our daughter, Sharon, had been an active participant in the lie that had torn apart the foundation of our family. At first, I couldn't fathom how this had happened. Joselyn had always been my partner, my confidant. We had built a life together, raised a family, and shared countless memories. Our relationship, in my eyes, was everything that a marriage should be. So, to learn that Joselyn had been seeing another man, and that Sharon had known and aided her, was a blow I wasn't prepared for. It felt like a cruel twist of fate, a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. As the emotional weight of it all sank in, my body began to respond in ways I couldn't control. The stress became physical, manifesting as tightness in my chest, headaches, and a constant feeling of exhaustion that seemed to drain all of my energy. Sleep was elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I was bombarded by thoughts of Joselyn and Sharon, of the betrayal that had shattered my world. It felt like my body was rejecting the truth, forcing me to face the fact that my life was no longer the one I had known. The next morning, I woke up, drenched in sweat, my body still heavy from the emotional weight of the discovery. I felt like a shell of myself, numb, disconnected. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee cup, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it. My hands shook, and I couldn't concentrate on anything for more than a few seconds before my mind wandered back to the painful truth. Everything felt surreal, like I was walking through a fog, unable to see clearly. The world outside my window seemed distant and unimportant compared to the chaos inside my mind. It was as if I had entered a parallel universe where nothing was the same, and nothing made sense anymore. As the days passed, I found it increasingly difficult to focus on anything other than the emotional wreckage left in the wake of the affair. The anger I felt toward Joselyn and Sharon was overwhelming. I would catch myself staring into space, my thoughts consumed with questions I didn't have answers to. How could they do this? How could they have destroyed everything we had? The feeling of hopelessness crept in, and for the first time in my life, I questioned whether I could ever trust again. Joselyn, too, was struggling with her own internal conflict. The guilt weighed heavily on her, and I could see the signs of her torment every time I looked at her. She would try to justify her actions, explaining that the affair had been a mistake, that she hadn't meant to hurt me. But her words felt empty, hollow. How could I believe anything she said now? The woman I had once loved, the one who had been my everything, was now a stranger to me. She would apologize repeatedly, and I could hear the sincerity in her voice, but it wasn't enough. It never would be. The damage had been done, and no amount of remorse could undo what had happened. The emotional distance between us grew with each passing day, a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. The more Joselyn tried to make amends, the more I pulled away. I couldn't look at her without seeing the lies she had told, without feeling the sting of betrayal. The emotional connection we had once shared seemed to slip further out of reach, like sand slipping through my fingers. Sharon, too, was a constant reminder of the betrayal. She had been my little girl, the one I had raised and cherished. But now, seeing her face was like looking at a stranger. How could she have been so complicit in this? How could she have known about the affair and done nothing? The trust one had placed in her was shattered, and the once unbreakable bond between a father and his daughter was now broken beyond repair. The guilt she felt was evident, but it didn't change the fact that she had betrayed me, and in doing so, she had torn apart the family I had worked so hard to build. The physical toll of the emotional turmoil began to take its toll on me. I found myself unable to eat, my appetite completely gone. I couldn't remember the last time I had truly enjoyed a meal. Every meal felt like an obligation, a necessary act to keep my body functioning. Even sleep became a distant memory. I would toss and turn all night, my mind racing with thoughts of Joselyn and Sharon. The emotional devastation left me physically drained, and I could feel myself slipping further into depression. The hardest part, however, was dealing with the breakdown in communication. Joselyn and I, once so close, now barely spoke. Every conversation felt like a battle, a contest of who could avoid the truth the longest. The love we had once shared was now replaced with silence, and it seemed as though we were both trapped in a prison of our own making. Every word we spoke felt like an accusation, a reminder of what had been lost. The anger I felt toward Joselyn was palpable, but beneath that anger was an overwhelming sense of grief. I mourned the loss of the person I thought she was, and I mourned the future we would never have. I thought about the life I had built with her, the plans we had made. Our future seemed like a distant dream now, a fantasy that would never come to pass. The betrayal had destroyed that future, and I couldn't see a way forward. The emotional fallout was so overwhelming that it felt like my very identity had been torn apart. I was no longer the man I had been just a few weeks ago. The shock of the affair had shaken me to my core, and I was struggling to find a way to rebuild from the wreckage. Sharon's role in all of this only added to the complexity of my emotions. She had been my daughter, my flesh and blood, and now I found myself questioning everything I had believed about her. The guilt she carried was undeniable, but it wasn't enough to erase the pain she had caused. I wanted to be there for her, to help her through this, but I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. How could I help someone who had contributed to the destruction of my world? As the days passed, I found myself becoming more withdrawn. I didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to face the reality of what had happened. I could feel myself sinking into a pit of despair, unable to find a way out. The weight of the emotional toll was unbearable, and I felt as though I was suffocating under its weight. The constant inner turmoil, the overwhelming weight of emotions, and the ever-present cloud of uncertainty left me feeling lost and broken. At the same time, the toll it took on my mental and physical health continued to intensify, spiraling into deeper and deeper despair. There were days when I felt as though I might not make it through. The shock of the betrayal had left me paralyzed, questioning whether I would ever find peace again. The destruction that followed the discovery of Joselyn's affair was swift and unforgiving. It felt as though every ounce of control I had over my life slipped away in an instant. What had once been a stable, albeit imperfect, world was now a broken shell of its former self. The devastation I felt was not just emotional, it was physical, and the toll it took on me was immediate and profound. My mind raced in every direction, and the weight of the betrayal, compounded by my inability to process the magnitude of the truth, left me teetering on the edge of collapse. I couldn't look at Joselyn without a flash of anger surging through me, threatening to engulf everything I had ever felt for her. She had shattered everything, my trust, our family, our shared dreams. It wasn't just her affair that tore me apart, it was her role in this dark and twisted narrative that made her actions feel like a personal betrayal. But I couldn't stop myself from wanting more than just an apology. I didn't want words, I wanted retribution.